Good morning. This is Glenn Tobias from thereturnofman.net. Um, just got done taking my son to school, and we do that just so we can spend a little bit of time together. Just one more little way to spend some time with a young man that's going to be a very fine young man, and he already is becoming. And so he and I have a few minutes we've been memorizing Proverbs chapter 3 lately. But we talk about other things. Today we talked about some civics and some events going on in our society right now, and had a little chat about that. Anyway, so and you know what? That's a good example of leadership, and that's what I'm here to talk to you about. I'm going to do 40 days. Actually, maybe a few more than that. But we're going to spend 40 or 45 days doing some lessons on leadership. So today I just want to lay the groundwork for that a little bit. Some of the things that we will talk about, and I don't think I'm going to script much of this. It's going to be conversation, but I will try to keep it very brief. Day one, we're talking today about just kind of an overview. Now, when I think about leadership and when I teach it, and when I execute on it or exercise it, I look at four categories, and I've got a template drawn up, and I'll be glad to post a downloadable version on my website, and you can go get it if you want. I won't do that today, but I'll get to that. There are four categories that I think are critical for leaders to think about. The first category is the characteristics of leadership. Now, on that note, there are too many people that think that anyone can be placed in a position of leadership and you are now a leader. That's not really accurate. There are other people, and we'll talk about why. There are other people that think leaders are kind of born or made, and that's true to an extent from the perspective. I have a good friend. He and I are a couple months apart in age. He grew up on the West Coast. I grew up on the East Coast. The biggest difference between us, well, a couple of big differences. He's 6'3" and I'm 5'7" or 8. But he's a natural athlete. He worked and that doesn't take away from how hard he worked, how hard anybody has to work to play in the NFL. But he played in the NFL back in the 80s, early 80s. He was a Redskin, Washington Redskins. He will always be, and throughout our lives, he's always been a better athlete than I would ever be. The differences would be if he was born a natural athlete and didn't put any effort into it, and I put immense efforts into my athleticism, being an average athlete. If I put immense efforts into my athleticism, I might get somewhat competitive with him because he's not making any effort to improve. But as long as he wants to put some effort in, I would never have been able to be the athlete that he would be. It's just the way it is. That's true of leadership. There are people that are born with some of the tools that can help them be a better leader. But those tools don't help them much if they don't exercise them. So what I've worked very hard at is studying the fundamental and essential tools, characteristics, and qualities of leaders that are accessible to anybody. So again, some people are going to be better at some aspects of this than others because they were naturally wired that way. God just made them that way. There are other people that will be better at other of the characteristics. There's certain things they'll do better. But anybody can improve incrementally in any of these characteristics and at any of these action steps that I'm going to show you over the next 40 to 45 days. So that's just some background. So today we're going to start off looking at there are the characteristics of leaders, And all of this is going to be built around an acrostic in each group. So we're going to take the word leadership, and so we'll have, what is leadership? 10 letters? 9? I'd have to count it up. I think it's 10. There'll be 10 characters. Yeah, of course, 10. What am I thinking? So there's 10 characteristics of leaders that we will look at. And each day we'll just talk about one of them briefly, talk about ways that you can work on that. These are all actionable, accessible, they're cookies on the lower shelf kinds of things. And so, and forgive me, I digressed there. Let me cycle back here. So what I want to tell you is we're going to look at 4 major categories, each with the word leadership built out into an acrostic, 10 different aspects of that category. We're going to look at the characteristics of leaders. And this is something I visit and revisit and review very frequently to see how am I doing in developing these characteristics. And that's a huge help. I mean, you become a better leader just by being aware of how am I doing as a leader? How am I doing in my leadership role? How can I, where am I the least effective in these 10 characteristics? And how can I focus on that a little bit while not letting the others drop off? How can I focus on improving that and just try to keep moving each of those categories forward? So the characteristics of leaders, then we will look at how leaders guide and direct and manage process and practice. So just kind of the everyday standard operating procedures. You know, when things are moving along basically according to plan, what 10 things do leaders do? Or what 10 things are leaders in that category? Then the next category is how do leaders manage or guide and lead during crisis? Now, what I'm always big on is trying to define every word in an actionable or practical or practicable way. So, crisis, in the way I define it and the way I use it and the way it becomes very, very practical. Because honestly, there are times when there's an upheaval, a big hubbub going on. People are all excited, worked up about things, and they think it's a crisis. And it's very helpful for that not, listen to this is important. It's very helpful for that not to be a subjective thing. Okay, if one person thinks there's a crisis and another person doesn't, what do? What do you end up with? You end up with a team that isn't working together because one person thinks a disaster is happening, the ship is sinking, and another person doesn't think that. So how do you resolve that? You resolve that this way, pardon me, you resolve that this way by first having a clearly defined, often reiterated vision. And you have your leadership team all speaking with one voice, communicating that vision early, often, and clearly. Okay? So you have to have a vision. Then you're able to say what a crisis is. And this is the definition I give it. A crisis is any event or environment or circumstance that can derail your team from achieving their vision, which could have been averted by an earlier decision. Some decision was made. Now, it doesn't always mean you made the decision poorly. It just means that you find there's something about, you might have made the best decision you could have made at that time. But some other decision could have changed that crisis, and that crisis is now taking you off track from achieving your vision. So that category becomes the third of the 4. We have characteristics of leaders. We have how do leaders guide and manage and influence everyday process and practices and standard operating procedures. Then this third category, how do leaders respond to crisis? And that's actually the simplest of all four we're going to look at. Doesn't mean it's easy. Always distinguish between easy and simple, because frequently simple is the hardest thing to do. Easy is what creates unnecessary complexity, because we avert taking something head on. Excuse me. But in the long run, that just undermines us. That's a freebie. That's a side note for you. So how do leaders respond to crisis? And then the final of the four categories, we're going to look at the leadership acrostic for how do leaders recover from failure. And really, if you think about it, of the last three of the four categories, the characteristics of leaders just kind of is an overarching, it applies all the time. But of the three, how do leaders manage everyday practices? How do leaders respond during crisis? Because crises are going to come. No matter how good of a leader you are, they're going to happen. Something's going to happen to try to derail you. And then there are going to be times we come out of that crisis well, we avert the crisis, or we steer our way out of it and get back en route to the mission. Other times we're going to have some failure. And we have to learn how do we respond to failure and not lose our position of leadership and influence. How do we make our team safe and still pursue the mission? And that really will cycle us right back into the first one again. It's just a constant cycle. I call them the rhythms of leadership, because that's kind of what they are. You ebb and flow. You flow in and out of these three categories throughout life. That's part of leadership. So that's the big overview. Most of the rest of the videos, I hope, are going to be shorter than this. I'll try to make them that way. But I wanted you to kind of see the overview of it. And then, we'll go from there talking about the four. And the first one, believe it or not, that we're going to talk about in the characteristics of leaders is love. And that may seem strange to you, but I pretty much assure you, if you tune back in for that tomorrow, that you'll be interested to hear how that fits into the role of a leader. All right, so this is Glenn Tobias. My website is thereturnofman.net. Website is not a fully operational Death Star just yet, but it's getting there. We'll make it that, and we will. I guess the Death Star were the bad guys, weren't they? I wasn't a Star Wars fan, sorry. But anyway, we'll be up and operating full speed. But go and just have a look at it. Be familiar with the opening page if you want. It's a pretty good looking page, I think. But anyway, so I'll look forward to talking to you soon. Glenn Tobias, have a great day, you leaders and influencers. Bye.